Today is the 29th day of September in the year 2017. I am Jamain Hatton. Today on the recap, we are looking at a model answer to the English B question, the poetry question in the English B exam for years 2018 to 2023. I am going to do for you a sample answer to a poetry question. So I'm trying to show you how we answer these questions, and I'm also trying to show you what to do and what not to do as we try to gain as much as we can gain in passing these English B exams. Let's go straight into that. So you're in the exam and you're answering this poetry question. Common sense will tell you, and I often say common sense is not very common, but common sense will tell you that you have to read your question carefully. So in reading your question carefully, you would realize that what you have to do is underline what's important and what's not so important. Well, ignore that. Well, you underline what is important. So the poems My Parents and Little Boy Crying, that's what the two poems you're looking at here. Both explore childhood experiences. Write an essay. It's an essay. It's not points format, it's an essay. Forgive my scribbles. But write an essay in which you describe the experience of each child. So you have to discuss the experience of the child or the children in both poems. And in the essay as well, you must show or must be able to discuss how the child in each poem feels about the other persons. So, how do they feel about the other people? That's what your essay must encapsulate as well. So, examine one device. In previous exams years ago, there used to be two devices that you had to discuss, but now they're asking you for you to just discuss one. That's easy there for you. So let's read this one more time to ensure we are all on the same page. My Parents, Little Boy Crying explore childhood experiences. Write an essay in which you describe the experience of each child. In the essay, you must also discuss how the child in each poem feels about the other persons involved in the experience, and examine one device, and that one device in each poem that presents the view of the child or that presents the child's experience, right? So good. Let's go then. That's 35 marks. In the past, it was simply worth 25 marks, but it's 35 marks now. So let's pay careful attention to the model answer that I would give. A little bit before we actually get into the model answer. CXT would normally do a mark scheme for its online markers. Teachers, of course, well experienced teachers, and they will follow a simple format, and it involves language and organization and content. And it can vary, but this is what we're working with for now. And I want to give you an understanding of how important it is to write properly here. So there always is a note in the exam. There's always a note to the examiners that there is no one answer. And that's beautiful because in English B there can be so many sides to things, and it's really how you explain that that will give you those marks, right? But what you want to understand is that you have to write properly. So language and organization is worth 10 points, 10 marks in the exam. And there's a note always to the examiners that if candidates do not write in continuous essay format, the highest possible marks they can earn on the language and organization criterion is 5. So it means if you don't write in essay format, if you separate your answer and say A, B, C, you are not going to gain those 10 points. The highest you can possibly gain is 5. And really, I would give you 4 or 3. I'm serious. Okay, let's carry on. If candidates fabricate information from text or poem, fabricate means make up. If you didn't read the textbook properly, or you didn't read the novel, and you go to the exam thinking, you know what, I'm gonna make up this story. Well, you're gonna make up failing. To be honest, you're gonna fail. Don't be silly. Read a book. Read a book. There's so many things you can do. You can read summaries. You can read a book. You can read. Oh well, I don't recommend not reading the book and read summaries alone, but read a book Supplement that with summaries. Look at videos. There's so many things to make you understand these texts and to make you understand these poems. Don't be lazy. I often tell my students you can't be ugly and lazy in this life. You gotta pick one struggle. I'm just joking here. So yeah, don't fabricate anything. Read your text and be able to answer your question. If you don't do that and you fabricate the information and you make it appear like that's what you read, then you will not do so well. The highest possible mark you can get is 4. And if I were your examiner, if I were the person marking your exam, I would have given you 2, to be honest. 2 or 1. Don't lie. Come on, read your book. Can't be lazy. Now for that sample. Read your question. Read your question one last time to ensure you're on the right page just before you begin to write. My parents and Little Boy Crying both explore childhood experiences. Write an essay in which you describe the experience of each child. In this essay, you must also discuss how the child in each poem feels about the other persons involved in the experience, and examine one device that is used to present the child's experience in each poem. 35 marks. Use the model question to give you an idea of how you start, especially if you do not have a start of your own. So in the exam, in the question we just looked at, we see the start of the question something like my parents and Little Boy Crying explore childhood experiences. Use that to guide you as to how you start. In my model answer here, I'm showing you in Stephen Spender's My Parents and Marvin Morris Little Boy Crying, we can explore 2 different accounts of childhood experiences. So use the start of the question to guide you as to how you answer the question. And you're going to add in some details, like for example, who wrote what poem, who is the poet, and show off that you actually know your stuff, right? So in My Parents, the persona, a child, recalls his attempts to fit into a group that he admired, but he was kept away from this group by his parents. My parents kept me from children. So you put in a little evidence there to support what you're saying. So you back up what you're saying with evidence and you quote that, use your quotation marks, double inverted commas, your quotation marks to quote what you're saying. This child was obviously warned against the company of this group because he was of a higher class, a higher social class than the children Spender described. And use the poet's name as you're writing. It shows that it's a smoother flow, really. The children are seen as wild and free spirited, and your evidence there is they climbed cliffs and played in the country stream or by the country stream. Perhaps, and that I love that word. My students will tell you I love that word because perhaps you don't know exactly what it is, or you're hinting to the fact that there can be many dimensions to the argument, right? Or many dimensions to what you're saying. Perhaps this free spirited nature of these children is the reason why the persona sees or seems to be admiring them. These are the children, right? Perhaps he too long to be just like them, but he is prevented from doing this or prevented from doing what he wants to do by his parents. Turning to Little Boy Crying, and you see the nice paragraph format there, you have to write in paragraph, that is continuous prose, and you use your link words to show you there as well. Turning to Little Boy Crying, we examine a 3-year-old's view of his father who scolded him for playing in the rain. Quick slap struck. That's what that was. That was the scolding. We see the typical emotive nature of a beaten child: swimming tears, splashing feet. You know when children don't get their own way, how they behave. They cry and they stamp their feet and they carry on. The boy tries to melt the heart of the father but described him as empty of feeling. So when he didn't win the father's sad or didn't win the father's empathy, he described the father as being empty of feeling. When he didn't get his way, yeah, completing that there. In both poems, it is evident, and you do a little comparison. And in both poems, it is evident that the parental figures have the child's best interest at heart. Yes, it might not be the best way, but in both poems, we see that the child's interest is really what both parents have at heart. So while you're writing, you might want to go back and ensure what you have written is good with a question, and then to see what you're about to write if you're still on track with a question. I know, like my students, my reviews are often detailed and I explain the entire poem for you, and you want to show off to the examiner that you really understood the poem and you write all about the poem. Do not go off course explaining the poem and not answering the question. If you do that, you'd not perform as you would expect to perform. Right? So go back. Remember I told you about that four you will be given earlier if you don't stick to details. Let's not go away from the point. Answer the question, right? So go back to the question. The second part of the thing says what? In this essay, you must discuss how each child feels. So now I'm coming to the point now of how each child feels. So you do that nice intro there again. You start a new paragraph. You can say, comparing the feelings of these poets or the persona, however you want to do it. But again, answer the question. The child in my parents has mixed feelings towards the other boys. He seemed to be afraid of their physical strength. I feared like tigers, their muscle, or feared more than tigers, their muscle. So that dot 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 there is a device. I'm going to ask you to research that device, or that technique rather. And really, it shows that we're leaving out some details there. That's not really important. But we just want to bring your attention to I feared and muscles, right? And jerking hands as well to give you the idea of how strong these children were. So for some reason he seemed to be afraid of their physical strength. The boy seemed to also be offended by them copying and teasing his lisp. But despite their cruelty and mud throwing, he looked the other way. What does that other way tell us? This tells us that perhaps, and again, the word perhaps he longed to forgive them. Where am I? Perhaps he longed to forgive them. That perhaps he wants to be their friend. So he's turning a blind eye to it in hope of one day being one of them. That's a little opinion there. He, however, is warned against this by his parents. Remember, the parents kept him from children who were rough, right? Who might have thought that they were better than these street children. Street children is what's your opinion of who they see these children are, right? Or as. The fact that the boy longed to forgive them tells us how soft he was in his admiration for these children. Next paragraph, so I'm going into the other poem now. I'm contrasting the feelings of the boy in My Parents to the feelings of the boy in Little Boy Crying. So, the feeling of the boy is foreshadowed in the title Little Boy Crying. The crying boy, that is telling you just how the boy is feeling. He cries because he is hurt, and yeah, by his father's punishment. The boy describes his father as fierce, and it says that the fierce man longed to hug you or longed to give you piggyback and bullfight and all of that. But look at the writing here. Describe his father as fierce and sadly sees him as an ogre. Remember that ogre was mentioned? Ogre that towered above him. So the remember the child is using the imagery of fairy tale because he's talking about Jack and the Beanstalk, and that's why he's trying to make sense of what is happening, and he's using that ogre. So he's telling us that he feels somewhat helpless to what is going on because the father is big and he's small. That is the idea. This image tells us that the child feels powerless and helpless of the situation. Though the father loves him, longs to lift you, he is adamant on teaching him an important lesson about life. Yes, what we were saying that the father longs to play with him, but the father is not doing that because the father wants to teach him a lesson about life. You must not make a plaything of the rain. You must not always be joking about life, Or that's the idea, that's the lesson the father wants to teach him. And then we go on to the last part of the question that asks you to identify one device that presents a child's experience. So we see irony is witnessed in my parents. It is ironic, and then you go on to say, not just say what the device is, but explain that device, right? It is ironic that a little boy who was badly treated longed to forgive his enemies. And enemies is not mentioned, but enemies is just what we would want to call them if they weren't friends. He smiled at them, but they never smiled back at him, right? This tells us that though he secretly admired them and wanted to be their friend, though that he wanted to admire them and be their friend, the two groups were separated, and the two groups were separated because of the different class, right? And to wrap up this model answer, we see allusion is mentioned, or allusion is given in Little Boy Crying. Allusion is very evident in the poem Little Boy Crying. It shows us how a 3-year-old sees the world. Indeed, he used fairy tale allusion, and that is in the sense of Jack and the Beanstalk, to describe his feelings. In this sense, he sees himself as little Jack and compares his father to the giant in the sky. Right? This paints the picture, or painted the picture, of how helpless the young child was compared to the giant in the father's hand, right? Or at the father's hand. So what he did, he tried to win our sympathy by doing that. In this illusion, I'll correct that. We also see that he hated the father. And he hated the father because at one point he mentioned that he wants to cut down the stalk that he was climbing down. I'm thinking again, Jack and the Beanstalk. At one point, Jack cut down the stalk. So the same thing there. He's using fairy tale imagery to explain how he sees or how he's experiencing his world. So that there is a sample of how we answer poetry questions in your English B exam. Both of these poems that we have looked at today, Little Boy Crying and My Parents, have been reviewed on this channel. So you might want to go ahead and listen to those reviews and then come back and see if you understand how you're required to write. Remember, you're not trying to explain both poems, but you're using your knowledge on both poems to explain or to answer the question that CXC is asking you. Right? Go ahead and take this question here for your homework. Yes, I'm giving you homework on the internet. Some places stand out in our minds because of the way in which they impact our thoughts. Consider the poems, and the poems here. Sonnet composed upon Westminster Bridge and South. Write an essay briefly describing the places being portrayed and compare the speaker's attitudes to the places being portrayed in both poems. So you're not just explaining or describing the places, but you're also showing the speaker's attitude towards those places, right? And finally, in each poem or for each poem, you are going to identify one device that create that effective portrayal of those places, and that's another 35 marks question. Hopefully I can get some time to review that one for you or to give you a sample of that one as well. But go ahead and write this essay. You can very well see this on your exam. Go ahead and comment and tell me what you think of that sample answer. If you're able to follow, let me know if I can help you further by looking at this in more details for you, or if that is just adequate and you understand fully well now what you have to do for the exam. Go ahead and like this, give me a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you can get updates on future postings. Bye bye.